Welcome to the Lovefly podcast. Paul Tizard, fear of flying coach for the last 25 years, and today's special guest. For those who follow him on Instagram, you'll be delighted to meet Captain Chris. Welcome.
G'day, Paul. How you going?
Very good. Yeah, I love the the proper greeting. Then, good day. Love it.
G'day. I could do the airline captain. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I could do that voice as well. Which one do you want?
I know you get special training to do the airline voice. So Chris has. Well, tell us a little bit about your kind of why we all know you now and your journey to date to the fact that I don't think we ever crossed paths when we were at Virgin, but I do believe that you know quite a few people that I know as well. So
yeah, we could play that do you know this person game all day, couldn't we? I mean, we know everybody, and aviation's like that. It's actually quite a small industry, and a lot of people know each other, even in different airlines. So it's not as big as people think. It is a very small industry. But the question was, how did I get to be on your podcast today? Well, we all know about the pandemic and what a terrible time it was. At the beginning of the pandemic, Virgin Atlantic had just taken delivery of a brand new aircraft called the Airbus A350-1000. At the same time, my daughter was playing with her mobile phone, as young teenage girls do, and she was fiddling around while talking to her mum and listening to me, which girls can do. They can do all these multitasking things. And I said, "What are you doing?" Because it was annoying me. She was fidgeting. And she said, "Oh, on the gram." And I went, "The gram? What's the gram?" She said, "Instagram, Dad." I went, "Yeah, I've heard of that. What is it?" And she said, "I'll show you." And she showed me her phone, and it was pictures of makeup and fashion and handbags and shoes. And I went, "Well, that's not for me." She goes, "No, it's got other things. Look." And she typed in Airbus, and up came a picture of an Airbus A350. And I went, wow, show me some more. And no, she said, "Look, I'll set up your own account because you're boring me now." So she set up my account on my phone, and I started looking at pictures of airplanes, and I thought, wow, with this new airplane we've got, I could put some pictures of the cockpit online and show people what this fancy cockpit looks like. And then I started getting what they call followers, people who like looking at these pictures, and I found that a lot of them were aircraft spotters that were actually taking photos of the outside of the aircraft while I was taking photos of the inside of the aircraft. And it was really good because they love the photos from the outside. The inside. I like the photos from the outside. And when we did some training up at Glasgow, there was quite a lot of plane spotters there that were regularly taking photos of and videos of our takeoffs and landings where we were doing training some of our pilots onto that aircraft type. And it sort of grew from there. And I remember there was that funny moment when I got 400 followers, which was more than my daughter. And I said, "Hey, look how I'm doing. I've got 400 people that follow me on Instagram." And she was going, "Yeah, whatever." Yeah. And then at the start of the pandemic, I think I had about 1,000 followers. And again, on the scale of things, I thought, that's a lot of people. There's 1,000 people who like to see pictures of airplane cockpits. And then the pandemic happened. And I was at home and I thought, this will probably last a month, like probably you and everybody else thought. Then after 2 months, you start getting worried. And then as it goes into the third month, you think, oh, how am I going to pay for the mortgage? And all these other realistic things start hitting you. And I put out I was home in France with my son, and he made me do a picture where I was standing up holding a sign above my head which said, "Buy airline tickets like you bought toilet paper," because at the start of the pandemic, people were rush buying on toilet paper and the supermarkets were running out of toilet paper. So I thought, I'm going to try and promote aviation by saying, go and buy airline tickets like you bought toilet paper, just exactly what the sign says. And hopefully people start buying tickets, and this will motivate people to go flying, and it might help the industry. Because again, I'm thinking, like you and everybody else in the world, this will be over in a couple of months. So if people start buying tickets, this will give a bit of trust in the airlines, and the airlines can plan for the future and get going again. Well, as we know, that didn't happen like that. The pandemic worsened, airlines had to ground fleets and then ground staff, and people lost their jobs. There was furloughs and things like that, and many, many people found themselves on the ground. So I then found myself with maybe, say, 20,000 followers, thinking, wow, I've got a real responsibility here. So I changed the tack a little from just not taking just fancy pictures.
So can I just ask you, sorry, Chris, so no. That was an interesting comment there. You just said you felt responsibility there. So something shifted for you by the sound of it.
Yeah, I did feel the responsibility, because remember, when people were losing their jobs, they were friends of mine. These are not just colleagues, they're friends of mine, people that I've worked with were now finding themselves out of work. And I felt a responsibility because I had this medium, which I didn't really know how it worked, called Instagram, where I could send the message. And so when I was still flying, because I was one of the lucky people who remained flying, and I'd be flying to Los Angeles, I would show a video saying, here we are in Los Angeles. Here we now are in Hong Kong. Here we now are in Johannesburg, and we're flying vaccines. We're flying COVID test kits. And I just wanted to show people that we are still flying. The airlines are still flying in a small way. And by doing that, I felt like I was giving all of them a little bit of hope that this will end. We're not sure when, but it will end, and you'll get your job back, and you'll be doing this just like I am. And I think also, I mean, it sounds a bit over the top, but I felt a certain amount of survivor's guilt. The fact that I was still going to work every day, all right, and they were wondering how they were going to pay their mortgage. Now, the furlough was good for a while, but eventually a lot of people did lose their jobs.
Yes.
And again, that responsibility came back on me to remind them, guys, I'm doing everything I can. I'm staying current. I'm training pilots. And then I went into the training pilot thing because pilots did start coming back about a year ago from now, because a lot of the airlines were realizing, hang on, this thing is not going to last forever. We need to get our pilots back up to speed. And so I was training from last June 21. I was back in the simulator regularly, retraining some of these pilots that had lost their jobs or been grounded on furlough or whatever. And I was absolutely flat out training pilots, basically over the past year. And more recently, I've been grounded just for some medical reasons. I've just calculated today, I've trained over 75 pilots in the last 5 months, getting them back online, just 75. So that's a huge
So just rewind a bit, that's really interesting. So the pilots that came back, that had been off for a while, what was their mood like?
It was a mixed feeling. They obviously didn't like to lose their jobs in the way that they lost their jobs, and they felt some of them had again, everybody's different, Paul. Some people were really upbeat about it. They found some job or career that they'd always wanted to take up, and they were able to do that. Others found that they loved a year or two home with young children. They really enjoyed that time, and they know that they're never going to get that again. And others were not so much bitter. They were just like, oh, you know what? I just want to get back flying. I just want to get back flying. But as soon as they're in the simulator, it was unbelievable. It was like they hadn't left. You know the expression riding a bike? Every single one of them, every single pilot turned up at the simulator, and I looked at them. I said, I know exactly how you're feeling. You go, why? How do you know that? I said, because I've trained so many people over the last year, and I know that your biggest concern is jumping in that simulator and looking silly. Well, guess what? You're not going to. And every single one of them jumped in there, and they were a bit rusty with a couple of the radio calls and a few of the procedural calls. But after the first 4 hours in the simulator, they were all up to speed. It was amazing how quickly they came back. And then obviously we didn't give them one simulator. They got like 4 or 5 simulator sessions and a test before they then went out and completed line training again. But every single one of them was as good, if not better, than they were prior to the pandemic, because they had this thing in their head that, right, I'm coming back and I'm going to want to be as good as I can be. And it was incredible to see that. And it's just a real
sort of gap, you know, so that because they're coming back. So that how long were they out of check then?
A year to 2 years.
Wow.
Anywhere in between that. And it was really interesting, Paul, because every time I'd be in the briefing room, I'd actually have to start the briefing with, Paul, can you tell me your COVID story? Right? Because everybody was in a different situation. You might have gone off and flown for, what do they call them? European air cargo, flying an A340-600. So you're current because you're flying an Airbus. Other pilots have gone off and flown turboprop aircraft or piston engine aircraft or done flying training on little Cessnas, right? Some people hadn't flown at all for 2 years. And it was interesting that all of them, every single one of them was no better than the other. It was just the ones that have been flying more recently, they were more up to date with maybe procedures and so on.
So what would you put that down to?
I think professionalism. I think you don't become an airline pilot and you don't get into a large airline and fly big jets unless you've got several thousands of hours. And during those several thousands of hours, you learn what we call airmanship, right? Airmanship means you've got a good common sense feeling about the whole of aviation and what you're there for and what your tasks are.
So you've trained a bunch up. You're now doing that. It sounds like you're doing that quite a lot of the time.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the main part of my job at the moment because I went off end of last year. I was just a bit stressed out. We had family issues going on as well. I then broke a finger just out gardening, bit hazardous gardening. I broke a finger. That was another 2 months off. Then I had an operation.
More dangerous than flying, by the sound of it.
Yeah. More dangerous than flying doing the gardening. And so I got my medical back 2 months ago, but I'm indispensable in the simulator at the moment because there are so many pilots returning to the skies. and the simulators are running 24/7, getting these pilots back into the sky. So I've been flat out doing that, and it's only now that next month I've got on my roster a few flights where I'm actually back in the simulator. Somebody's going to have to train me or untrain me, and then I'll be back flying myself, and I should be flying middle of August and then flat out during September and the rest of this year, actually operating flights again.
Yeah, that's really good. It's good to see you back out there again, and you'll be no doubt doing some more of your Instagram stuff as well. So a couple of things that caught my attention. So one is from a fear of flying perspective. So these people have been, because this is a question that's come out. So people have been, for some that haven't been flying and that they've just been like delivering a cardo or whatever they've been doing, and they're coming back. You said they would go through about 4 or 5 simulators. So talk me through the sort of the thinking behind that.
Okay, so when they first come back, we give them what we call a refresher sim. And we give them 2 to 3 refresher sims. Each simulator session is around about 4 hours. And it's not just 4 hours, it's an hour and a half of briefing to remind them, of procedures and things that may have changed. And then we do a 4-hour simulator session, and then normally half an hour or even up to an hour of debriefing, depending on how much information they want to talk about. So you're looking at a 6-hour day, and that's getting to work and getting back. So it's a 6-hour session, 4 hours in the sim, and 2 hours of briefings. And we do say they do 2 or 3 of those with an instructor like myself or another instructor, and then they'll go into a 2-day test. So it's another 2 4-hour sessions with briefing and then debriefing. So it's quite intense. So there's 5 full days of work, and they don't normally do it in 5 days. They'll normally do 2, 3, or 4 days of simulator. Then they'll have a couple of days off to think about it and revise, and then they get their test, which will be 2 days, what we call a LPC OPC, a license proficiency check, and an operator's proficiency check. The license proficiency check is a CAA requirement to have their license signed to say, yes, their ability is up to a standard that they can fly this A330 or A350. And then they do an operator's proficiency check, which is the airline saying, yes, they can carry out all our procedures to a standard, which is the highest standard available for the airline. And then we also put them through just belt and braces, I suppose, expression. We then give them what's called a line-orientated evaluation. So even after they've been signed off, we give them another 2 days in the simulator to just run them through some emergency situations in a what we call a loft situation. In other words, in a line situation. Rather than being in a simulator, taking off, having an engine failure and sorting that out, we have them in the cruise, and we give them we have a series of scenarios which they're not expecting, and we just throw them at them and see how they deal with them. And it's just it's more of a confidence boosting for them as well, to remind them that they're actually doing their job very well. We just throw things at them and they deal with it. They either get the aircraft on the ground or divert somewhere else or whatever the scenario might be, and they walk out of that sim just feeling unbelievably confident, think, yeah, you know what, I actually am good at this job. And that's really what we do it for, just to remind our pilots that all that training is worthwhile, and you can't put a price on training.
I totally agree. And one of the things that might be just quite useful as anyone's listening to this and perhaps hasn't thought about the simulator training, would you just sort of like rattle off the list of disasters that you put them through? Because most people's fear of flying list, all the stuff that you do in the sim is the stuff that they get tested on. But just to sort of prove it, and it's not my words and hot air, just tell us a bunch of stuff that they have to go through. And
so we'll do things like, we'll start off with something simple. And again, remember, every single one of these scenarios has never happened to any of our pilots. It's like what we can do in a simulator is we can create the absolute worst case scenario, and we can just throw it at the pilots and say, right, deal with it. So a nice simple starter would be where, say, we're flying from Bombay or Mumbai back to London. We're over some high terrain in Turkey somewhere, and we can do everything. We can call from the back of the cabin as one of the cabin crew and say, hi, Captain, there's a loud noise at the R4 door. One of the doors is making a loud whistling noise. How loud? Well, it's quite loud. And then the pilots will look in and they'll see that the pressurization system is not doing its job properly. In other words, there's a leak somewhere on the aircraft. And now that somebody's called and said that there's a noise there, maybe the rear door's leaking, right? And again, people who are scared of flying think, oh my God, this is terrible. The pilot simply increase the airflow in the cabin, and that normally sorts the problem. They might go to a lower altitude. And then once they've done those things, I think, right, I'll up the degree of difficulty. So I make the leak bigger and then bigger and bigger. So we end up with a depressurization scenario where the pilots then have to not dive's a strong word, but they have to descend to a lower altitude rapidly. They put their oxygen masks on themselves just to protect themselves. And all they're doing is they're trying to get down low enough so that the oxygen masks in the cabin don't fall down, because once they come down, everybody in the aircraft is going to panic because they see a mask in front of their face and they think, oh, I've got to put this on. But if the cabin doesn't go above 14,000 feet, they don't need their oxygen masks on. They're none the wiser. The aircraft gets down to a safe altitude, it diverts to another airport, and everybody's happy. It's when we call it the rubber jungle falls down, that's when people might get scared. And that's the sort of thing that we want to try and avoid, or we always try and avoid, because it's all about safety, and it's all about people not feeling anxious. A lot of people, this is your department, a lot of people are anxious flying, and they don't need to be, because the training that we give our pilots is second to none. And we give them the absolute worst case scenario, and they still sort these problems out. And that's as bad as you could ever give somebody, when you just keep upping the leak rate, so they have to keep descending, but again, staying above all the high terrain and then diverting somewhere. And it's just a pleasure to watch pilots doing this, and everybody can do it. They can all do it.
Yeah.
And they sit there and they get on the ground. They look a bit proud, and they think, "How was that?" And you go, "Yeah, well done, fantastic. All right,
that's brilliant.
Something else for you." And we just keep giving them these.
So what else? What else? Because these are great. These are all questions that come up time and time again. Because I reckon what we should do, right? We can have a double act. I'll get all the nervous flyers that listen into the podcast and say, write your list of things that you're worried about, and I'll pretty much guarantee it matches your list of things that you test pilots on.
Oh, absolutely. Another one we did last week, pilots were flying along in the cruise. I called them up. This is, again, a made-up scenario. And I said, oh, we've had a call from the airport that you've departed. They've put the wrong fuel in your aircraft. That would never happen. But I've said that, so they've put the wrong fuel in. Just as I said that, I pressed a couple of buttons in the simulator, which made the fuel filters clog in the engines. But not on one engine, on both engines. And then a little while after that, I failed both engines. So both engines stopped working. I mean, that's never happened, but it did happen in the simulator the other day. Now, I'll tell you what, those pilots, they put it into a nice glide, they turn directly to the nearest airport. And remember, a lot of people that have a fear of flying don't realize an aircraft is a glider. Every single time you descend in an aircraft, it's gliding. Every single time, right? When an aircraft gets to its destination, about 120 miles out, the pilots will bring the thrust levers back to idle. When the thrust levers are at idle, the airplane is a glider, and it glides to its destination. It's only when they're putting the flap and the gear down that pilots need to bring the power back up again, just to keep the aircraft stable for the approach in case they need to do a go-round. But effectively, all aircraft, and every time you go flying, the aircraft is gliding. So anyway, these guys lost both engines, so they put the aircraft into a normal glide. In a glide, I've just said you can go about 120 miles, and that's a long way to go in an aircraft. That's nautical miles, 150 statute miles. And during that time, they will then attempt to restart the engines. So they'll start one engine, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. When they get to a lower altitude, they can start the auxiliary power unit, which is the APU down the back of the aircraft. Once that's going, they get more electrics, and they also get an extra supply of air, which will assist with starting one of those engines. Obviously, I gave them one of the engines back so they could extend their glide. I never gave them the second engine back, so they continued into Ahmedabad in northern India, another airport they'd never been to before in their life. And they diverted into this aircraft quite safely in a thunderstorm as well, because I thought
Of course, yes. I mean, that wasn't enough, really, was it?
Yeah, another degree of difficulty.
And did you let both pilots live, or did you kill one of them off? I mean,
No. Having said that, sometimes we do that. I can speak into either of their ears individually, and I can call them and say, right, you've had a heart attack as well now. And so, I'll just throw that in just for a bit of fun, just to see how the other guys react. So, you've now got.
Does the word bastard mean anything to you, Chris?
Yeah. They've said worse. But so you've now got a pilot landing in a single-engine airplane at an airport that they've never been to before at night in a thunderstorm on their own, and they still do it. And this is what I try to say to people, that the people that are flying you, they've done this. They've seen these scenarios, and they've seen it worse than you could ever imagine on those air crash investigation programs, which is normally just one little thing happens and they mess it up. And I'd say to anybody, stop watching those programs, because it's sensationalizing things that happened back in the 70s and the 80s. Pilots are trained better these days. Aircraft are safer these days. Aircraft don't have mechanical failures anymore. That's a fact. It's normally human factors, we now call it, and it's about training people to avoid those human factors, and that's what we do in this data.
Well, you're doing a great job. I mean, if that's not enough to whet people's appetite. So is there anything in an aircraft that you think you would worry about?
That I would worry about? Well, it's the same worry that you'd have on the ground, all right? And it's probably the worst case scenario. And again, the worst thing you could have on the ground and the worst thing you could have in the air would be a fire, any sort of fire, whether it be a fire in the cabin, whether it be fire on an engine. But that's the worst case scenario. And that's just part of the world we live in. And obviously aircraft are designed in a way that they don't catch fire. I mean, every single part of an aircraft is designed to be flame retardant, flame proof. We have, I don't know how many, what do you call them, fire extinguishers on board the aircraft. You know all about that and where they're located. So it's very, very rare. It has happened, but it's extremely rare. And here's another way of looking at it. And I say this to guys in the simulator. In fact, I only said it yesterday. We have a thing called emergency electrical configuration, okay? In other words, you can shut down all the electrics on board the aircraft. All airliners can do this, and the airplane will still fly perfectly well. The fuel pumps will still pump fuel into the engines will still turn, and you'll still have some basic instruments to navigate the aircraft along your route safely. So why would you ever need this situation? Well, if you did have a genuine fire on board the aircraft and you didn't know where it was coming from, maybe from the avionics bay or something. So, and I put the analogy, if you're in your home and you put some toast in the toaster, and then you walked off to another room, and then you got distracted by the washing machine that was making a noise, then you put some stuff in the tumble dryer, and then by the time you get back to your kitchen, it's full of smoke. What do? Do you lower the altitude of the kitchen? Do you decrease the temperature of the kitchen? Or do you just go to the main fuse box and switch it off? Because that's the best thing you can do, right? Take away the source of the fire. So if there's a fire on board an aircraft, the first thing we do is we take away the source, and that might be the electrics. And then we start working out where the smoke's coming from, put the fire out, remove the smoke using air conditioning systems, descend to a lower altitude, and maybe divert, or possibly definitely divert. So again, these are the scenarios we work through with pilots as well regularly, like every week.
We have Captain Steve Bull on here as well.
Yes.
And obviously that's his background. He's taken a bit of a break from it now, but he's a, like you, sim instructor, sim tester, sim trainer, all the different terms. And I love all that because I think it's very reassuring for people to think of how much is going on. And one of the things that Chris said to me when we were arranging this, he said, I don't really do the fear of flying stuff, that's your domain. He said, I train pilots and I do a lot of stuff with the social media as well around raising the image of aviation. And I said, well, actually, you've been doing a lot to help nervous flyers, because I know there's a lot of people in this group and that listen to the podcast that follow you on Instagram. So you've been helping people without realising.
I think I have, because I do receive a lot of DMs from people, and they say they have a fear of flying, and they say, thank you very much for just producing what I produce on Instagram and showing people basically what goes on behind the cockpit door. And I think that's one, from my point of view, one of the main things that can create anxiety towards flying is just not knowing. It's like if you're in the back of a taxi and there was no glass between you and the taxi driver, you'd be nervous as well, because you think, what's going on up the front? I can't see the traffic. And that's something you know about. You know about cars, and you know about being on the road. So being in an aluminium tube, 10 miles high, flying at 500 miles an hour, it doesn't seem right, but it's completely safe, and it's completely, we train, overtrain, and it's probably the safest mode of transport. Like, I mean, you probably say as well to people, getting to the airport's the most dangerous bit. Once you're at the airport and you're on board that airplane, that's the safe bit where you can sit back, you can relax, you can watch a movie, have a glass of champagne or whatever you want to do, and just relax, knowing that when you get to the other end, it's going to be stressful again. So yeah, enjoy the flying bit, because the flying bit's the nicest bit.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk a bit about the famous Captain Chris stuff. I mean, you're like an icon now, aren't you? I do remember that, the toilet roll thing. I saw that all over social media and stuff. But so I understand how you sort of started. There's a bit of curiosity, and you thought, I could educate people, and then you've started to get followers. You've started to feel this sort of sense of responsibility. Yeah. But what keeps you going now?
What keeps me going now? It's actually interesting. Really good question. So I was doing it to promote the airlines, I was promote aviation, and I was doing it mainly to support people that were grounded, who were thinking, will I actually ever get my job back? Now that people are coming back and they've got their jobs, and the airlines are going, there's boom time again for the airlines. And I do feel sorry for the airlines trying to get as many people they can on flights, with also trying to get pilots, cabin crew, ground staff, everybody trained up and going again. It's a difficult job for everybody, and everybody's involved at the same time. But I've changed tack a little bit, that I just want to continue promoting aviation. And I've changed the tack where I have so many young pilots contact me, guys and girls all around the world saying, I want to become an airline pilot. How do I do it? And they see my picture, they see my videos, and they think it's easy. And I just remind them, I said, it's not easy, but it's very, very worthwhile. And, you know, you just need to take it one step at a time. And I think I love the whole fact that I can inspire these young people to get into aviation, to show them. So my main thing is inspiring people. My second one is educating people. And that's where you come in as well, that a lot of people that ask questions possibly are anxious of flying. And so they ask me questions about, how do you do this approach? Why do you do this approach? Why do you fly at this altitudes? How long do you spend in the cockpit at any one time? Do you sleep on board the airplane? And all these other questions, because they're obviously, they want to know this. So I try and answer all those questions as well. So like I said, I like to inspire, I like to educate, I like to motivate people to either get on board an airplane or take up aviation, whatever that might be. And also I chuck a little bit of entertainment in, make it a little bit fun, because again, it's a social media. And if you don't have a bit of fun, you're not doing it properly. So they're my main pillars, I suppose. You know, inspire, motivate, educate, and make it fun. Make it fun.
Entertainment. Yeah. Well, I've watched some of your stuff because Hannah was the one that alerted me to you. Hannah looks after the Instagram stuff because I'm rubbish on it, and so I've had a look at, and I just think I've kind of been really impressed. I mean, I know you can fly, and that's pretty impressive in itself, but being able to do all that stuff, so that must have taken you ages to get your head around all that.
I don't know how I do it as well. I don't know. It's funny, isn't it? I've taken it on as a little bit of a hobby, and it's now not overtaken my life, but it's become part of my life. I mean, I have to post something every day now. I receive over 250 messages a day, so please don't send me. No, please send me messages. I'll try and get back to them, but it's almost impossible to reply to them all. Although I'm getting a knack of doing that. I press the record button, just talk it, and then Siri writes my text for me. They're not always correct. So if you do get a message from me that's a bit garbled, it's because Siri doesn't understand me properly. But I try and reply to everybody, especially young people wanting to become pilots, and especially people that are nervous of flying as well. They're the ones that I prioritize to try and get back to, because I realize how important it is, and I realize the role I have to try and help people, because it's a responsibility.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
nobody pays me for it, by the way.
No.
People think, how much money do you make on Instagram? And I go, I don't make anything.
No.
I do it because I enjoy it. I do it because it opens doors. You know, like last week I was invited to Farnborough by Gulfstream and Airbus as guests of both of those companies. So that was a really nice thing. I've been invited to fly with the Blades. I've been invited to go up again with the Blades or 2XL to go flying in their 727 because they want me to see one of their North Sea oil dissipation runs that they do in the 727. There'll be more about that later. I've been asked by many people to do many things, and I'll never say no, because I love to promote aviation. I've been gliding. That was fantastic. I've never done gliding before. So that was an incredible opportunity.
Although you glide every time you work.
Every time we go to work, we glide. We glide in a big 300-ton glider. But and another cool one is I've been invited to fly a Spitfire in the future. So that's exciting as well. But that's what I do it for. I do it for having the opportunity to look at everything there is in aviation and then share it with everybody via Instagram.
I love. There's so many things I want to ask you about. Let me ask about the gliding, and I'm curious. Were you at all nervous going up without any engines?
Absolutely not at all, because, like you said, I understand aerodynamics and understand how the glider works. So once you're flung up into the sky, getting down is the easy bit, right? So airplanes. I understand thermals. I went up with a very experienced pilot, an ex-Navy Harrier pilot, so he knew what he was doing. So we went up in this glider, and I was just fascinated. I didn't realize that they were that good. I don't know like you said, I didn't know what to expect, but I expected it to be no problem. I wasn't nervous at all. But finding a thermal and going up in the thermals was a really amazing experience. It was almost like fishing, I said. It was like you're out there trying to find out, trying to catch the thermal. And then when you catch a thermal, you're right, stay in the thermal, and you do a tight turn and go up and up and up and up, and then you get a bit of altitude, then you can glide a bit more, and then you can find another thermal and go up. It's like fishing and sailing together. You're always trying to catch something. You're trying to catch the wind, trying to catch a thermal to then get you a little bit higher, to a little bit further. Yeah. And I didn't even realize that you could actually go on cross-country flights in gliders, something that I didn't even realize. I thought you just went to your local airport, somebody flung you up in the sky, and you then in your glider came back and landed. But no, you can go long distances in these things if you know what you're doing. So I'm definitely going to take it up as a hobby, because I think it's amazing. I don't know why I never did it before.
No. So that brings me to, why did you become a pilot?
That's an easy one, and it's an easy and difficult one. So we've all got friends who are in their 50s who still don't know what they want to do with their life. We've all got those friends. I've got some great friends like that, and they've tried everything, and they've been successful at some and not so at the others, but they still don't know what they want to do with their life. And I sort of like, in a way, I think, wow, I wish my life was a bit more like that, because when I was a 12-year-old boy, I was on a family holiday, first time I'd ever been on an airliner. As we were walking up the stairs of a Trans-Australian Airlines 727, my father pushed me towards the flight attendant and said, "Oh, my son Christopher wants to see the flight deck." I didn't know what he was talking about, right? He just made it up. He wanted to see the flight deck, and having a 12-year-old boy was a good way to get in there. So he said, "My son wants to see the cockpit." And they said, yeah, sure. So next thing, I was in this thing called the cockpit, where there was 3 men in there with lots of dials and knobs and switches, and I didn't know what I was looking at. And all I remember is the captain saying to my dad, "Would Christopher like to stay here for takeoff?" And my dad said, "Yes, he'd love to." So he left. These guys strapped me into a seat, which I know is a jump seat behind the captain. And I sit there absolutely dumbfounded or mesmerized, watching these 3 men get this massive piece of equipment off the ground and into the sky as fast as I'd ever seen in my life. Because I was a kid, I'd been in a car before, but this thing just gets faster and faster and faster. And then eventually we're flying in the sky. I didn't know what flying was. You know, I'd seen airplanes, obviously, but I'd never been in an airplane prior to this date. And here I was now in the cockpit. And I remember them so vividly turning around after they'd done their checks, and we were now in the sky, and the noise was now behind us. And the captain looked at me and he said, "So what do you think of that?" And my mouth was just open. And I was just like looking at them dumbfounded. And I just said, "Is this your job?" And they laughed at me, which didn't help a 12-year-old boy very much. And I went, "No, really, is this your job?" And they went, "Yeah, we're pilots." I went, "Yeah, I suppose, yeah, you're pilots, aren't you? Do you get paid for this?" And they all laughed at me again. And that was it. And I thought, I want to be a pilot. That's it. I want to be in this cockpit with these guys. And so now here we are 40-something years later. I'm thinking, I can do that for young kids via Instagram. 55% of my followers are between 25 and 35. That's the biggest group. And the next biggest group is younger than 25. So all of those people I'm influencing to become a pilot. Hopefully I'm doing a good job of it. And that's why I like Instagram as a medium, to show kids, hey, when I was 12, I got to sit in the cockpit, but now you can't sit in the cockpit anymore. That's just the rules and how they are. But I can still take you behind the cockpit door and show you what we do, and hopefully inspire you and motivate you to consider a job in aviation or a career in aviation.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, your stuff has been brilliant. I mean, the fact you're managing it once a day, that's a pressure in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. It's a bit of, we all have pressure in our life. I've also got to try and go jogging and keep fit. So that's another pressure. It's just like that. It's just something you do.
Yeah. So it's become like a habit for you, yeah.
Yeah, it is a habit. I wake up every morning. My wife doesn't like it. She said, "Get off your bloody phone." But yeah, no, I'm always on my phone and always checking for messages. And I just do it. It's part of my life now. I try not to distract too much with my family time, but it does. It takes over sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. You're getting 250 messages a day. So I haven't looked recently, but what are your followers up to now?
Today it'll probably go through 350,000.
That's a responsibility, isn't it?
Don't say that now.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. I just like to educate, inspire, motivate, and entertain.
Yeah, you're definitely doing that. So, a couple of quick fire questions then. What's the best bit about being a pilot for you?
The best bit about being the pilot is being able to see the world differently to other people. Most people who travel the world, they plan a holiday and they say, this year we're going to go to Rome, or this year we're going to go to Dubai, or this year. I get to go to all these places regularly, and seeing the world for a day or 24 hours, you know the lifestyle as well, just for 24 hours is sometimes enough, just to get an idea of where you might want to take your next holiday.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you ever been scared whilst piloting?
Every pilot has been scared. I don't think, this is a good question, again, for your listeners especially. Pilots aren't the bravest people in the world. They're just regular people. And yes, every single pilot has been scared in an airplane. Hopefully, they've been scared in a small airplane, and that's what made them a better pilot in a big airplane. I don't think a pilot's a good pilot unless they've been scared at least once, twice, or 3 or more times. If it's a lot more times, you shouldn't be flying. But if you scared yourself a few times, you've become a good pilot.
Awesome. I've got a few more like that. What's been your best trip or best memory from all your flying career?
Best memory was flying into Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport as a very young 30-year-old A340-300 captain. with, sorry about the noise in the background, somebody's doing some building, A340 300 captain into Kai Tak, Hong Kong airport, with my dad on the jump seat and one of my brothers on another jump seat. That was a pretty amazing memory.
That is awesome. That is great, isn't it?
Cool.
Can't put a price on that.
No, it's one of those best memories ever.
Yeah, I know that the problem with your podcast, right, is that anyone who's listening now will say, don't let it end. So when somebody comes on who's popular, they'll say, can you just let them stay on? So I'm now having to rack my brains thinking about other questions. I want to ask you tons of stuff. But
one of my talents, I've been told, is talking. I don't know if it's a talent or a skill, but yeah, I can not stop talking. And
that's brilliant.
Going, just shut them up.
Oh no, I love it. So what about then tips for nervous flyers then? I know it's not your bag, but I think you've probably, what would you say?
It's right. Yeah. So everybody at some stage of their life is a nervous flyer. And I say the best tip is do not ever watch those, I don't know what they call air crash investigation programs.
Awful programs.
They're awful. They're not doing any benefit for you. But watch videos on aircraft taking off, aircraft landing. And I say, this is sounds silly one, go gliding. Book yourself in for a gliding lesson or a introductory flight in a light aircraft. Because the big problem that I see that most people have is it's the unknown. They get on a big jet and think, oh my God, what's that noise? What's that noise? Oh, it's really, why is that doing that? Why are the wings doing that? Why are the wings falling apart? That people are scared because they don't know. And it's just that the fact that people don't know what they're doing, or what the aircraft's doing, I should say. But if they go on an introductory flight, whether it be on a Cessna or a glider or something like that, just going up with an instructor, I think that's probably one of the best things they can do, because they think, wow, I could fly an airplane. It's not that difficult. And it's not that difficult. There's obviously a lot to learn to get a license, but going up in a glider or a light aircraft is probably one of the best ways I would recommend people to overcome any fear of flying. But that's just my thing. You're the expert.
Yes, it can be really helpful. I often say if you don't like turbulence, it's probably not the good route, because because you're going to move a lot more in a little aircraft. But if you want to understand how it all works, it's perfect, because you do get to see it all firsthand and to experience the realness of it all. And I think it's quite stunning. I did have some flying lessons myself, and I remember just thinking, wow, it's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, because in a large aircraft, it's like they're so huge, you can lose sight of the fact that you're actually flying. It doesn't. Well, I do. I can just go to sleep.
And again, as you just said with the turbulence thing, probably gliding isn't the right thing to do if you don't like turbulence, because gliding is all about finding the turbulence to get up. I mean, turbulence is thermals, and gliders need those thermals. They need that turbulence to gain altitude. So if the turbulence is your problem, don't go gliding, but go up in a light aircraft on a nice winter's morning. Perfect.
Yeah. So what about when you travel and you're in, you go out on an aircraft, you're a passenger, what are you like?
I regularly commute between France and the UK. And yes, I suppose I never stop being an examiner or a trainer. I sit there and I think, he's using the rudder too much. He's got far too much rudder in for that crosswind takeoff or landing. But I mean, nobody else in the airplane realizes that. And I was actually, here's one for your listeners. I was actually on a flight once from Paris to Toulouse with Air France. And I was just sitting there looking out the window. I think I was reading a book. And then I heard the engine that was near me. I was over near a wing. The power went up on that engine, and I could quite distinctly hear the power on the other engine going down. I looked around the cabin because I realized that we'd lost one of the engines had stopped operating. Nobody else on the airplane realized. And I was looking around going, has anybody else realized? And nobody did. They were reading their books, they were watching their iPhones, they were listening to music, they were sleeping. And I guarantee you, I was probably, apart from the cabin crew and the pilots, because I saw them rushing up and down, I was the only person on that plane that realized that one of the engines stopped running. And then the airplane did a very, very slow turn back towards Paris, and nobody said anything. And again, I'm looking around thinking, I really am the only person that's realized this. And then we came back, and then eventually the captain made a PA and he said, hello, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a problem with one of our engines and we're going back into Paris. So was it a big deal? It wasn't a big deal, right? Every single person on that airplane, once we landed, would have been calling their friends, oh my God, I've been on an airplane, one of the engines failed, we had to return, and they'd make a massive big drama about it. But as I just said, the airplane just did a nice slow descent, came back into Paris, landed perfectly well on one engine, and then I actually waited around and then got another flight a little bit later back down to Toulouse. Whereas a few people probably wouldn't have, because they're probably a bit concerned or scared.
And that's an interesting thing you've made, because I'm very mindful of time, but that's an interesting point you've made, because I think you have to be really, really careful what you let into your head. So if anyone's listening, follow Captain Chris if you're not already. I mean, you like a few more followers. He's only getting 250 messages a day, so yeah, he's starting to cry now. You can't see this on the podcast.
There's even more while we're talking now. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing what you do, and really, really grateful. I know I've been pestering you for a long time. You're a busy guy. You've been doing what you do. I can't tell you enough how grateful I am for you giving your time and coming on today, and hopefully inspiring a few more people to follow you and also to learn what's really going on.
That's the most important thing, just to educate people on what's really going on behind the cockpit door, and to assure every single one of the people that listen to your podcast that flying is the safest way you can get from point A to point B. And I would always fly instead of drive, or take a helicopter or a motorbike or a boat, or even walking. Flying's safer than walking. Crossing the road's dangerous these days. Get on an aeroplane if you can.
Captain Chris, thank you very much.
Okay, see you, Paul.